briefing now. So, and yeah, just to let everybody know that we are recording this meeting, and we will be sharing the recording with the journalists as well. So, yeah, so hello and welcome everyone for this press briefing today. I am Jyotsna. I am the co-convener of Working Group on Access to Medicines and Treatments. It is a network of civil society organizations, academics, journalists, and patients and patient groups, basically people who really work on access to affordable medicines in India. And one of the major work that we do is to follow and most of the times challenge what the big pharmaceutical companies try to do, whereby they, in the name of the innovation and many other myths that they create, they try to keep the prices of medicines very high. They have made medicines a luxury good rather than something that saves lives of people and should be available to everybody who needs it. So that is something that we follow. And as all of you must have read by now, that India signed a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom yesterday. This is something which has been discussed for many years, and there were times when some of the text was leaked in between. So we learned the kind of provisions that it was going to have. And today we are going to specifically talk about certain provisions and very problematic provisions that this free trade agreement has brought about in the field of intellectual property, and that is something which is really going to undermine access to affordable medicines for citizens of this country. And it is really sad that India has given in to. Hello, can everybody else mute themselves? Thank you, Sanjay. Yeah, so it really undermines people's access, and it is sad that we have given in on these provisions. Uh, Last year, India signed another FTA with 4 European countries, which was the India FTA free trade agreement. There also we saw the provisions that India agreed to, which were very problematic, and and India changed its patents rule last year, which again actually goes against certain rights that are guaranteed to patients, patient groups constitutionally in this country. So the current agreement that was signed yesterday, that IP chapter actually just takes those problematic provisions further, and I think we really need to challenge it. And so therefore, this FTA, yesterday's FTA, has to be seen in this light of all the FTAs that India is signing and is discussing. India is just discussing a treaty agreement with US and many other countries. And if we start to normalize these provisions in these FTAs and further go on to have those problematic provisions and change our patent rules and act, then we are really giving a lot of ground to the big pharmaceutical countries and hampering the generic industry of this country, which essentially means higher prices of medicines. So this is what we are going to talk about today, and I am really happy that we are joined by the people who have been working and raising their voice against high price of medicines in the country. So and they are Professor Biswajit Dhar, Roshan John, and Gopa Kumar. So first, I would like to call Professor Biswajit Dhar to speak. Dr. Dhar is an international trade expert, and he's also distinguished professor in the Council for Social Development, which is a Delhi-based institute. So, Professor Dhar, please.
Thank you, thank you, Jyotsna, and thank you for inviting me to this press conference. I think it is a very important step that you have taken to raise awareness about what has been agreed to in our comprehensive economic and trade agreement with the United Kingdom yesterday, and especially on access to medicines. And we're looking at the intellectual property chapter, which is chapter 13 of this this agreement. Now, I'll briefly highlight some of the very problematic areas of this agreement from the point of view of access to medicines. And let me preface my specific comments uh, on the SETA by saying that we had struggled really hard after the TRIPS agreement came into being in 1995 to take advantage of certain flexibilities in the TRIPS agreement as we saw it, and which we thought was extremely important for us to introduce in our amendments so that we could ensure access to affordable medicines for the people of this country. Now, we saw several of these opportunities, and of course, one of the most important of these was the use of compulsory licensing system. And as most of you know, that the compulsory licensing is an extremely important instrument to keep prices of medicines in check, and the government is empowered to give a license to any Indian company who shows interest in producing the medicine in India, and of course the government then also sets the price at which this medicine would be sold in India. So there are two things. One is, of course, enabling an Indian company to come into the market for these extremely high-priced medicines, and the second is, of course, setting a price which the government considers affordable. Now, unfortunately, despite putting in so much of effort, we have seen only one compulsory license being issued, and that was the license that was given on the buyer patent to NATCO. Now, I must also emphasize here that on the issue of compulsory license, we were very unhappy with the language that was put in the TRIPS agreement, and which many people argued that this was the compulsory licensing system in the TRIPS agreement, and this is Article 31 of TRIPS, and the heading of this this particular section, it says other use without authorization of the right holder. So we rejected the language and we said that, look, this can't be compulsory license, because as we have seen coming from the Paris Convention earlier, the compulsory licensing system was very clearly an instrument embedded into the patent system to prevent abuse of their monopoly rights by the patentees, and therefore this compulsory license system was introduced in the patent system, and this is for over 100 years. This has been the case. The TRIPS agreement, of course, changes the language, so we agitated against it, and we India, and civil society from India and other countries, Brazil, South Africa, we agitated, and then and especially after the South African, I would say an infamous case where the big pharma got after the South African government for enacting a law which would provide affordable and anti-AIDS retrovirals. So we joined hands, and then we were successful in getting a ministerial declaration in the Doha Ministerial Conference on TRIPS and public health. And the TRIPS and public health declaration clearly said that I'll just read out the language from the Doha Declaration, and it said each member has a right to grant compulsory licenses and the freedom to determine the grounds upon which such licenses are granted. So it's a very clear, enunciation of the right of countries to issue compulsory license and also to determine the grounds on which they can be issuing the license. Now look at what has happened in the SETA. And this is, like I said, the chapter 13 is on intellectual property, and this is Article 13.6, which is, the heading is Understandings Regarding TRIPS and Public Health Measures. And this completely distorts the Doha Declaration spirit. And what does it say? The first paragraph, and this is what I want to point out to all of you, it says the parties recognize the preferable and optional route to promote and ensure access to medicine is through voluntary mechanisms, not compulsory, voluntary mechanisms such as voluntary licensing, which may include technology transfer on mutually agreed terms. Now, technology transfer, as you all know, has been our long-standing demand, developing countries, and we have been demanding technology transfer from the developed countries, to further our, industrialization process. Now, even technology transfer becomes a voluntary kind of a mechanism, and of course, this is voluntary thing. So, this whole emphasis on voluntary licenses, almost completely kills the compulsory licensing system. And we all know what a voluntary license can actually do to prices of medicines, because in the voluntary license, the big pharma, issues a license on a voluntary basis to the Indian companies, and importantly, dictates the price at which the medicine is going to be sold, because it's in the interest of the proprietary company to set higher prices, because its fees, whatever its returns would be, it will be based on the price at which these medicines are sold in India. I'll give you one example where this actually, there are many, but one very striking example where this happened was the case of the COVID drug remdesivir, where the American company Gilead had issued a voluntary license to Cipla. And when we looked at the number, and Gopa Kumar and I had actually written about it, we saw the price at which Cipla was selling that particular product. We found that on a purchasing power basis, the price at which Cipla was selling the medicine in India was higher than that Gilead was selling in the US. So, purchasing power, as you know, takes account of the purchasing power of people in different countries. So the Americans found it cheaper to buy Gilead as compared to an Indian who would actually remdesivir, as compared to an Indian who would want to buy had to buy remdesivir. So there are many examples of this kind, and we are now moving away from a sovereign right to determine the price of medicines and to make them affordable, to a situation where the prices of medicines will be dictated by the big pharma. And we know, even like in the US, President Trump is struggling against the big pharma, trying to rein in the prices of medicines in the US. Now, what power do we have in trying to rein in the big pharma? I just leaving that thought for you. And I think there are these issues, really need to be highlighted, because once we have started diluting the flexibilities that are available, then the other flexibilities that we have, and of course, the other thing that was diluted already last year in the FTA, India FTA, was that the pre-grant opposition was diluted. And I must mention here that one other important requirement or other important requirement for issuing compulsory license was the working requirement, that companies, if the companies were not working the patent in India, then this was the ground for issue of compulsory license. And every year, the patentees had to provide information about the status of working of the patent in India. This was a requirement in the Patents Act. Last year, this was diluted and said that they can provide this information once in every 3 years. The same provision has been repeated here, that the companies, the patentees are supposed to provide working information on working at least no for you know for not every year, but after 3 years, and this could actually be even go up in the years to come. So the compulsory licensing system, in letter and spirit, and in terms of the mechanism, has been diluted, and this doesn't bode well for the patients and the affordability of patients in India and the affordability of medicines. My other colleagues will speak more about the other areas where these problems are. So I'll end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dhar. And I think it is also important to be highlighted that it's the major problem is that these free trade agreements are not being discussed publicly, not even in the parliament, and therefore everything that is what we learn and everything, it is after the deal has been signed, and which in itself is a problem. There is when the government is discussing something as important, which is going to impact the people of the country, then there has to be more transparency when the discussions are happening too. Uh, I would like to invite KM Gopa Kumar next for this. And Gopa is a senior researcher and legal advisor with the Third World Network. And he's been working on these issues for decades. Gopa, please, if you can take the floor.
Thank you, Jyotsna, and thank you, Professor Dhar. So this,
I am in a webinar.
UK-India FTA, in short, is we can call it as a TRIPS Plus through backdoor. How it became a TRIPS Plus through backdoor? It is, not explicitly, including TRIPS Plus provisions. We are familiar with the TRIPS Plus provisions like, related to patentability criteria or patent time extension, etc. If you look at this agreement, you don't find it. But it is TRIPS Plus through backdoor. How it becomes? Please look at Article 13.16 of 13.16 of the IP chapter. We see this sentence: the party shall endeavor to cooperate among their respective patent offices to facilitate the sharing and use of search and examination work of the parties. So this is basically will debase the section 3D type of safeguards against the evergreening, because once you start using the examination report and the search report of the UK Patent Office, naturally it will lead to something called harmonization of substantial harmonization of the patent law. So this is the danger. So now a lawyer may say that, oh, it is basically saying shall endeavor. Okay, so therefore still you have the freedom. But I think the pressure will be much more on India. Apart from the power asymmetries, there are provisions, there are institutional mechanism has been introduced to exert this pressure. Please look at Article 13.15, where the working group has been created, and that working group is constantly meeting and will meet, and they are going to ask what kind of endeavor you have made. Then India will be in trouble. And we also need to look at Article 13.14, which says that parties shall endeavor to cooperate in relation to activities. Then one of the activities is that fostering international harmonization. And also to, again, another area is that working with UK in forums like WIPO and WTO. So please recall India's position to oppose the substantial patent law treaty in the early 2000s. So now from there, we have moved through this agreement to promote harmonization at the international level. So this is a problem. The moment you move on harmonization, and which will be facilitated through Article 13.16, all the safeguards to protect against the patenting of the same substance or obtaining of multiple patents on the same substance will be in danger. So Professor Dhar has already explained to us how the debasement of the compulsory license has happened. Similarly, this provision also attack the safeguards against the abuse of patent rights by obtaining multiple patents on the same medicine. So therefore, this UK-India IP chapter, progressively debasing the public interest safeguards in the Patent Act. It is moving forward to the TRIPS Plus, and it is TRIPS Plus. That's why I called it as a TRIPS Plus through the back door. And how it moving forward? If you look at FTA, there were two provisions, which one is Professor Dhar mentioned already, that is working on patents. We diluted the requirements of annual submission to once in 3 years, and also to keep the information confidential. I'll come back on that on a while, in a while. And second, in the FTA, we also said that, okay, the burden of filing all required information to the patent office, the punishment for that was been diluted by saying that a mere failure should not result in cancellation or revocation of the patent or patent application. But now it says that mere failure should not lead to that, right? This was done in FTA. But now we see we moving from FTA to UK FTA, what we are seeing that, okay, there is a dilution of compulsory license provision, and there is an explicit reference to voluntary license mechanism. And it is stating that that is a preferred mode, and that's an optimal mode. Again, then a push for harmonization. So all these will basically leading to the debasement and tilting the balance towards the heavily favoring the patent holder. So this is the what is this FTA is doing, and in the long run, this will compromise the ability of both the central and state government to facilitate access to affordable medicine. So that's a concern here, and we would like to place that at the center of this debate, because there are a lot of talk about the kind of duty cut, how the whiskeys are going to be cheaper in the country. But apart from whiskey, what's going to be costly is the most necessary things, that is, the essential medicine. So last one more point, then I'll sort of conclude. That's on Article 27, the Form 27, which is basically every patent holder is supposed to submit the working status of the patent. That's very important to initiate a compulsory license application, because you'll have to provide an evidence. That evidence is to show that, look, this is the amount of patented medicine sold in the country in a particular year, and that shows that there is an unmet demand. So therefore, it constitutes a ground for granting a compulsory license. And Form 27 is submitted by the patent holder. So that's an evidence. That's a self-speaking evidence. There is no burden on the applicant to prove it further, right? But now there is a clause saying that make it confidential. So what all aspects of that information will be confidential, we do not know. But if it is confidential and in the absence of any public data, it will be on the applicant to prove that there is an unmet demand. Applicant means applicant for the compulsory license. And now you read this with the explicit mention of preference of voluntary license. This is basically giving a signaling effect to tell the compulsory license applicant, we don't prefer a compulsory license application. So, when we say ease of doing business, signals are important. Here, this is a clear signal to generic companies not to choose for compulsory licenses. So this will have adverse impact on our health, and therefore we all request you to highlight these issues, because what is now not told is the adverse impact on people's life. What is mentioned till date is that of the benefits, but there are high costs involved in this. That's our life, especially countries like India, where we spend substantial amount of our savings to safeguard our health, or whenever there is a hospitalization, all our savings may get wiped out. So therefore, it's important. This agreement is basically debasing the very public interest which was incorporated in the Act, and then these provisions become redundant as we move forward on further FTAs too. Thanks.
Thank you, Gopa. Thank you for making those important points. I would like to now invite Roshan John, who is an intellectual property and trade lawyer and has been following with many of the FTAs that India has been part of. Roshan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jyotsna. I think most of the pressing concerns have been covered by Professor Biswajit, Dhar, and Gopa. And I would here kind of focus on three aspects, which I think is all. I'll echo them again, what Professor Dhar and Gopa has already said, but focusing on mainly three issues that regarding transparency, the voluntary licensing, the voluntary mechanism part, and also the worrying trend of repetition of dilution of flexibilities in across different FTAs. Now, firstly, starting with the transparency concerns. I mean, this UK-India FTA negotiations have been going on for the last 3 years now, and the negotiations has been completely non-transparent from the very beginning. At least from the IP standpoint, we had to rely on leaked text in 2022 to raise our voice on some of the most concerning provisions on IP, which would have extended the term of patent. Thankfully, after constant pressure from civil society on those provisions, those are not included in this FTA, which is good. But again, this was only possible because of the leaked text that was leaked then, and we could raise our voices against those provisions. But apart from them, after that, after 2022, there has been no update or no transparency on how the negotiations were progressing, and how it was not, neither the negotiating text was available for public scrutiny. Civil society group, patient groups, and even elected representatives were kept in the dark on how the negotiations were progressing. So that was one regarding how free trade agreements have been non-transparent. Free trade agreement negotiations have been non-transparent throughout the years. Now, second thing is regarding how the agreement frames voluntary mechanism. I think both Gopa and Professor Dhar has raised it, is that they consider the agreement basically consider voluntary licensing and technology transfer as the preferred and optimal way to promote access. Now, this is not just unnecessary to include it there, but it's also deeply problematic, because voluntary licenses are one of the tools among many to increase access, including, as my earlier speakers pointed out, there are other mechanisms like compulsory licensing as well. And we have seen during COVID and terms and other things how voluntary licenses are at times conditional and at times limited as well. So they are not a substitute for legally binding safeguards under the TRIPS agreement and the Doha Declaration. And no international binding agreement should position voluntary actions as something superior to sovereign rights under international law, which is what I think the UK-India agreement is currently doing so. Now, as I mentioned, that some of the most concerning provisions are out, but the agreement still kind of replicates some of the problematic language that we have seen, particularly during the FTA-India FTA that was signed last year. Now, these include provisions that could undermine India's patent working requirements, and it pre-grant oppositions were mentioned last year. We see a mention of opposition this time also. And other important public health safeguards were used. These safeguards are used to ensure that the patents are not abused and affordable generic versions are made available. Now, the repetition of these IP provisions or the provisions with dilute safeguards across multiple FTAs is concerning. We've seen it in the FTA, we are now seeing it in UK as well. Now, it creates a pattern that risks diluting TRIPS flexibility and setting up new standards, new IP standards outside the WTO framework. Now, the standards could eventually become a de facto baseline. So now all the negotiations that India would go into, these standards that has been introduced through the FTA or through the UK has now become baseline, and no other country would just agree to this. They would push for more. So once you have pushed the envelope a bit further, now you're negotiating with the EU, you will negotiate with the US, then the envelope will just like be pushed wide open now. So now the more frequently these provisions are embedded in binding trade deals like this, the harder it will become for countries to maintain the policy space that is needed to protect access to medicines. Now, I would just like to quickly conclude by saying that, because most previous speakers ahead have went into the details, I would just like to say that, the EU-India FTA negotiations are already going on. And now it's critical that India protects its public health safeguard by maintaining that it doesn't go beyond the TRIPS agreement and firmly rejecting any TRIPS plus provisions, not just the substantial TRIPS plus provisions like data exclusivity or patent term extensions, but also other harmful IP measures which dilute the flexibilities that the Indian law provides, like the working requirements and other things, so that it doesn't create a de facto baseline of baseline to multiple FTAs. So just to conclude that the voluntary mechanisms should not be elevated above legal rights that's available under international law, and just flexibilities must be preserved and strengthened and not just quietly undermined through territories negotiated in secrecy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roshan, and thank you, Dr. Dhar and Gopa. And just to correct myself, Dr. Biswajit Dhar is not with the CSD anymore. So he's a former professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. So if anyone is quoting him, this would be the correct designation. Now the floor is open for questions. If anybody has questions, they can raise their hand, or you can put your question in chat as well if you want. Pramiti, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, thank you so much for the very interesting presentations by all the speakers. It was quite informative. Just looking at the provision on voluntary licensing, I see that there are quite a lot of parallels in the language of that provision with the pandemic agreement as it was finally negotiated, especially the point about mutually agreed terms and voluntary licensing. So I was just curious because during the pandemic agreement negotiations, India was quite strongly in favor of mandatory technology transfer, as far as I understand. And this kind of voluntary language and mutually agreed terms only came in towards the end by push from the European Union. So I was just curious how that then comes into this kind of UK-India FTA at this stage, considering that for quite a long time, up until very recently, India was arguing very strongly for mandatory technology transfer in multilateral forums like the WHO. Thank you.
Thank you, Pramiti. Can you introduce yourself as well?
Yes, sorry about that. So my name is Pramiti. I am currently based in Amsterdam at the University of Amsterdam. I'm doing my PhD on access to pandemic vaccines, and I'm a lawyer. And I also work with a couple of NGOs advising them on legal aspects of medicines access.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Dhar, would you like to take
this
question?
This is one aspect I forgot to mention in my intervention, which is that by agreeing to, almost sort of kick out compulsory license and bring in voluntary license, I would say that India is is going back forum. We have heard that the government has time and again expressed its commitment to multilateralism and the multilateral trading system. And even today, we have, shown very strong commitment, towards the WTO. And others maybe as made statements saying that, we would like to remain engaged, and and that's a forum. Now, so commitment made in the multilateral forum under the multilateral trading system has now been sort of being diluted. And this is what Pramit is giving another example, that, we made a strong pitch for, a strong, would say, provisions regarding technology transfer. Now, technology transfer for the developing countries has always been a minimum must in terms of going forward. And I'm sure you would know, Pramiti, that in the 70s, thanks to the pressure that India and other developing countries put, and after the UN General Assembly resolution on the new international economic order, there was a code of conduct on technology transfer that was being negotiated under the UNCTAD. And of course, it went nowhere because before the negotiations could end, the GATT started discussing about the Uruguay round, and the whole process was thrown out. But that's where we are coming from. Even in the climate change negotiations, technology transfer is a non-negotiable element in our position that we have taken along with other developing countries. That finance and technology are a minimum must for us to move forward and implement our commitments under the UN FCCC. So it's a strange kind of a situation today, that what we consider as absolute must is being diluted through a bilateral free trade agreement. So one doesn't know that whether government of India thinks that it doesn't need technology anymore. So if you are going to engage in technology transfer deals on mutually agreed terms, you're never going to get any technology, because this is something that the advanced countries have been holding on to. They've been denying access to technology. They've been and denying the developing countries to move up the development path by refusing to provide access to technology. So I'm completely perplexed to see this language, and it's completely unacceptable as far as I'm concerned, because having participated in many of these international processes where we have strongly argued for technology transfer. In WIPO, we have actually made a very strong pitch to forget history and to suddenly come and do a bilateral trade agreement, where all these issues, all these important elements are compromised, is clearly unacceptable.
Thank you, Pramiti and Dr. Dhar. We have another question from GS Mudar for the Telegraph. And Mudar is asking that how exactly do the provisions which have been mentioned, 13.6 or 13.15, undermine existing provisions in the Indian patent laws? And that's because the FTA does not eliminate or do away with India's own IP laws on compulsory licensing or safeguards against evergreening. So how does this really work? Yeah, Gopa.
So that's why I said that it does not explicitly accept any kind of TRIPS plus, which we know, or what we call typically as TRIPS plus. But what they do is that a very systematic debasing. So let's take compulsory license. So all the compulsory license provisions are there. But what is important is the signaling, right, in the business. they call it signaling, is very important. So if you are on the beginning of the agreement, very clearly says that the understanding, both parties, here the both parties agree that the preferred mode for making access to medicine is through the voluntary mechanism. So that basically means under the Indian Patents Act, it is the companies who are supposed to file the patent, file the application for compulsory license. Only companies can file the uh, uh, application for compulsory licenses. So here, no company is going to file it. They are not filing it precisely because of the, please recall the 2016 USTR submission by the US Business Council, where they openly said that Indian officials said that they will not grant any compulsory license. So this way, this provision is going to create a chilling effect on the compulsory license part of it. And second, the agreement has not defined what exactly a compulsory license. So we still do not know whether the government uses covers under this understanding or not, right? Because if you read the TRIPS agreement and the Doha Declaration, compulsory license include the government use actually, especially the Doha Declaration. So now the government is basically backtracking with this, agreeing with the UK and backtracking from its responsibility by saying that, okay, our preferred mode is voluntary license. Only when it failed, then maybe something else, right? So that way it is debasing. And similarly, what I explained earlier on the patentability criteria also, the moment you start using the examination results of the UK Patent Office, in UK, patents are available for new use and new formulations. Their kind of patentability criteria is different from ours. We set a high threshold level as per our act, including section 3D. So that if our examiners start depending upon the examination report of the UK Patent Office, there would be a functional harmonization of the patent law. That way, the Indian Patent Office will grant or may agree the patents which UK Patent Office is given. So this is what is happening everywhere in the world. And Indian Patent Office is also known for even undermining Section 3D already, because we have granted many patents for many medicines which even rejected even in the Europe. We granted such patents. So there are various studies available. So how already Section 3D is undermined by the practice of the Patent Office. But so this is the way this FTA is going to undermine the public interest safeguards in the Patents Act.
Thank you, Gopa. Do we have more questions? Or would Roshan or Dr. Dhar like to add?
I had a question.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Can you hear me? This is Rupali Mukherjee from Times of India.
Perfect. Yes, Rupali.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand that the FTA, as it's been signed, and we're talking about how certain public health safeguards are being undermined. Do we have some kind of a text available which we could kind of use, which points to the different aspects which we discussed here, in terms of the the CLs being undermined, or the Indian patent offices kind of the under the functional harmonization which Gopa mentioned. Under that we could have issues around it, and that would actually help us in terms of just trying to list out what are the different areas under which it could be under threat. That was one. And the other question I wanted to ask was that under VLs, I just wanted to understand, when in the existing structure, doesn't the patent holder decide the price at which the generic company is going to be, I mean the licensee is going to be kind of selling the drug at in the country, or I mean, that was the query which I had. I mean, what is changing now?
Thank you, Rupali. Important questions, both of them. Yeah. Dr. Dhar, maybe you can take one of them or both.
Jyotsna, can I just respond on the last? No, I think the point that we are trying to make is the emphasis on voluntary licensing. we're never happy with the emphasis on voluntary license, and there are other international organizations who also promoted voluntary license. So we have always pointed out that look, we have actually got a very clear understanding that compulsory licensing can be used to improve access to medicines. Providing access to affordable medicines. That's very clear. We know the pitfalls of voluntary license. When a voluntary license, of course, the patent holder, the proprietary company, the big pharma, is always always has an advantage. It has better bargaining power, and then it can push its Indian counterpart to accept any kind of prices. And of course, higher prices would benefit both. So there is no question that voluntary licensing mechanism is going to undermine access to affordable medicines. But the problem that we are pointing out here is that now we have a legally binding text on intellectual property agreed to by the government of India, which promotes voluntary licensing and has more mention about compulsory license. So clearly, the dice has been cast in favor of voluntary license, and that is a concern. The voluntary license, which is already being, was already not being used. And we were making efforts to persuade the government, including during the pandemic, that you should be issuing compulsory license. Now, that has not been happening. Now the government says that, we agree that the preferred mechanism is voluntary license. So what do we now say about access to affordable medicines? It just goes out of the window, in my view.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And just to add, yeah, so the thing is that patient groups and all of us have been asking for more and more compulsory licensing by the Indian government. And what is happening is the opposite of it. Instead of actually addressing access issues through compulsory licensing, which hasn't come through really in a long, long time in India, even though for example, we saw in the case of bedaquiline for TB medicine, India is the capital of TB in the world. We have more than 1/4 of the total world's cases, and still we don't have. So it is an issue that there is no doubt about. And when it is voluntary license, as is being pointed out, yes, the pharmaceutical company, which is the originator company, does determine a lot of the clauses. It determines in which countries or jurisdictions can the medicine be sold and not sold. It does dictate those things with the generic company. So there are those problems. And compulsory licensing, of course, gives more autonomy to the government also in terms of what how to use the medicine, what is the pricing, and where all it can be sold. So there are those issues, and I think as has been pointed out, of course, about technology transfer. I mean, that is also very important in voluntary licensing. Those terms are being determined at a very different level. With regard to the first question of Rupali, Gopa, Roshan, would you like to say? I mean, some text that we have. I know we do. If that can be shared, which does talk about problems with voluntary licensing and
Roshan can
harmonization.
explain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Roshan.
Roshan.
So sorry, on the voluntary license, I think we can share a text. MSF has a briefer on voluntary licensing, so I can put it on the chat. And I think on Rupali's question about the text of the UK-India FTA, I think Gopa has already shared it on the chat. So,
Yeah, thank you. Well, anyone else? Any questions? I cannot see any hands up. Would the speakers like to add something before we close? So, I think I would just like to say that, instead of signing FTAs after FTAs, India should really be looking to protect its the provisions in IP and issue compulsory licensing more and more for access to medicine. And there are so many other mechanisms that should be, incorporated in our policies. So, so I think that's about it. Thank you everyone for joining. We will be sending out a press release shortly, and we will also share the recording of this webinar with the press briefing with you all. I hope, I'm sure, yeah, we have contact numbers of all of you. If by chance somebody thinks that we may not have, please, you can share your WhatsApp number or email ID in chat, and we'll send it across to you. And that's all. Thank you everyone for joining. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very
And
much.
thanks to the speakers, of course. And thank you, Gargya, for arranging all of this for us.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.